Hey folks, Scott Walters here with the Bulletproof Garage in another episode of Project Brutus. And if I sound excited, it's because I am. We have finally rotated the selector levers on our ratchets from counterclockwise to clockwise. And we are going to assemble the short block for our 7.3 IDI turbo diesel build. As a reminder, we're shooting for 550 foot-pounds of torque at the rear wheels. So let's get started. Okay, another task that I am not looking forward to, cleaning this rusty old block. As a reminder, this is a low-mile engine, all right? But the engine came out of a truck that was used to plow snow and put salt down. As a result, it is pretty rusty. So I want to get all that rust off and that grime off because we're obviously going to be painting this at some point, and I want the paint to be able to stick to the surface, okay? So, the tools of the trade, here you go. We're going to use a lot of brake clean, a lot of wire brush, and a lot of elbow grease, all right? As a reminder, when you're using something with a wire brush on it, wear your protective equipment, all right? I don't want anybody having an eye poked out. Now I've already loosened this up, but another thing you want to do is you want to go ahead and remove these plugs, all right? This goes into your water jacket, so that allows you to drain out any old nasty coolant that's in there. So like I said, I've already removed these and I've already drained that, so but don't forget to take that step as well. All right, let's talk about the core plugs or the freeze plugs. That's these guys right here, all right? These are tricky, okay? They require a special tool to get in correctly. That tool is hard to come by, but if they are not leaking on this particular engine, the 7.3 or the 6.9 IDI, do not mess with them, okay? So no evidence that these are leaking, so they're staying as is. Okay, next step. Remove the oil squirters. I'm going to hone these cylinders out here shortly, and the oil squirters are going to get in the way. So let's go ahead and get those out. Okay, now I'm going to clean the cylinders up in preparation for honing them. You know, they don't have to be spotless. You just want all the grime and grit out of there, though. Houston, we have a problem. What I'm looking at is the number 8 cylinder here, all right, and about halfway down the bore, it's rough, all right. You can hear the screwdriver against it. So what happened apparently is that the engine got some water in that cylinder and it sat for a while and it rusted. And when they started the truck up again, the rings went ahead and cleaned off that rusty spot, but the corrosion did eat away some of the cylinder wall. Now, it's not deep, all right? It's not deep at all, so a hone may take care of that. If the hone doesn't take care of it, then I'm looking at buying a set of pistons and having the engine bored out 20 thousandths or 30 thousandths, and I really didn't want to do that. All right, the other option is just to leave the rest of the cylinder standard bore and to get this one sleeved. But we're going to have to see what we're going to do here. I may just try to hone this one out first, and if it hones out, I'll continue with the rest of them. If not, then it's time to start shopping for pistons. Okay, what I've got here is a ball hone. This is 320 grit. All right, I've got some mineral oil. You don't have to use special honing oil, but if you don't have special honing oil, mineral oil works fine. You can also use just 1030 motor oil. All right. Flexone recommends about 500 RPMs on the drill, and the hone needs to be spinning before you insert it. We're going to shoot for about 30 seconds of honing and about 18 strokes or so. All right. So here we go. And you're supposed to go faster on the last few strokes to give yourself more of a crosshatch. Now, for the $1 million test, let's see if we got that spot out. Folks, I'm not confident that we honed out that spot, but we'll know here in a second. Nope, I can feel it already. It's still there. Well, there it is. That spot is still there. And I'm not surprised. I didn't expect that to hone out. So at this point, I've got two options. I can go ahead and bore the block out and go with all new pistons about 20 or 30 thousandths over. Really hesitant to do that because this is a thin wall block to begin with. I'd like to stay standard bore, and what I may end up doing is just getting this one cylinder sleeved and then bored back out just a standard bore, and using the pistons and the rings that I already have. All right. When I say using the rings that I already have, I sourced new rings for it, thinking the cylinders were fine. Obviously, I should have checked before I ordered standard size rings. All right. Okay, our starting point this morning is a block that's fresh from the machine shop. It's been decked. All the cylinders have been honed, and number 8 needed a sleeve. If you recall from a previous episode, number 8 had some water damage in it. And our options were either to sleeve number 8 and keep the other cylinder standard, all right, or bore everything out to accept an oversized piston at the minimum size necessary to clean up number 8, all right. We wanted to keep it standard bore, so that's what we did. We had a sleeve installed, we've got a standard bore block, so let's get started. Okay, now installing the piston oil squirters. That's these guys right here. I've already put a drop of Loctite on the bolt, and it's just going to slide in like so. All right, and this gets torqued to 100 inch-pounds. Okay, moving on. Okay, next up we've got to mic the crank and rod journals, and once you're done that, go ahead and write down what you get. Yeah, right on the money, 2.49835. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and install our main bearings. So these are half groove main bearings. As a reminder, the groove goes in the top, All right, and obviously your bearing caps are marked as far as which cap they are and what the orientation is. All right, the arrow points toward the front of the engine. Once these are all installed, we'll go ahead and torque them in a two-step sequence. All right, first everything gets 75 pounds and then they get 90 foot-pounds. All right. Now we're going to measure our main journal clearance, all right? So we've got the main caps torqued to spec. We've got our bearings installed, and we don't have any lube here. This is just dry at this point. So what I've got is my dial bore gauge, and it has been zeroed on the circumference of the main journals, and all the main journals were right on at the same circumference, so I don't even have to change anything. All right, so what that means is since it's zeroed at the circumference of the main journals on the crankshaft, the reading that I get here is going to be my actual clearance. All right, so I just insert here and I get my reading, and I've already checked all these, and it's really nice. Everything is right at 2 thousandths. All right. So the technical manual says you can have anywhere from 0.0018 or 18 10,000ths all the way to 0.0046 or 46 10,000ths. I mean, the upper end of that is pretty loosey-goosey if you ask me. I'm not sure I would run something that's over 4 thousandths on the main journal clearance. But again, we're all really good here, right around 2 thousandths, so let's continue. Okay, before we install the crankshaft, we need to put some assembly lube on the bearings. I'm using Redline assembly lube. Okay, more assembly lube. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to torque all the mains except for number 3, all right? This is number 3 right here. We need to check our crankshaft end play, all right? So, again, same as last time, 1 round of 75 foot-pounds and then 1 round of 90 foot-pounds, but number 3 just stays finger tight. All right, I always like to check and make sure the crank is still turning freely, and it is. Yeah, it feels really nice. All right, let's hit 90 foot-pounds. All right, first thing you want to do when you set end play is you're going to pry the crankshaft back and forwards, all right? And this is with number 3 still hand tight. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and torque number 3 down to spec. All right. All right, now checking crankshaft end play. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the crankshaft back. All right. And then I'm going to zero my dial indicator. Okay, now that that's zeroed, I'm going to go ahead and move the crankshaft forward. Oh yeah, nailed it. So that is 5/1000ths of end play, and that is right in the middle of where we need to be. The spec for this engine is between 2.5 and 8.5 thousandths. So at 5/1000ths, we are right in the middle. So that's good. Moving on. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to measure rod bearing clearance. All right, so what I have here is I've got a rod. It's got the rod bearing installed, and it's been torqued. On this engine, it's 38 foot-pounds followed by 51 foot-pounds. And now we're just going to measure the inside diameter here. Since we've already mic'd the rod journals on the crank, then we're just going to do some simple math, okay? We're using the same process as we did to measure the main journals, so you can use a dial bore gauge, which is the preferred method. You can use plastic gauge. You can use a snap gauge like I'm going to use here, all right? Now that I've got that measurement, I just go over here to my calipers and I measure that distance, and then I'm just going to do some simple math. Okay, I'm getting right at 2.500 for the inside diameter of the big end of the rod, all right? And that particular rod journal was at 2.498, which is perfect. So I'm getting right at 2/1000ths of clearance, which is right in the middle of the factory spec, all right? Now we're going to go ahead and check our piston ring end gap. So I'm just doing the top ring here. So go ahead and insert the ring inside the cylinder and use your piston to push it down. And that squares it in the bore. And once that's done, you go ahead and get your feeler gauge and you measure the gap. All right. So I've already measured all these, but I'll go ahead and get another measurement just to confirm. Yeah, so this one's right at 20/1000ths, which is a little looser than I'd prefer, but after I had the cylinders honed out, they're a little looser than they were before they went to the machine shop. When I had checked these initially, I decided to go ahead and go with gapless second rings. So the top ring gap really doesn't make a whole lot of difference because I've got gapless second rings. Now, these are from Total Seal. These are the gapless second rings. So since they're gapless, you really don't need to pay much attention to the gap, but all I did is I just put both of them in the bore and squared them up just to make sure that they were the right size, okay? So if they'd sent me the wrong ones and there was zero gap and they were buttoned up against each other, we'd have problems. But I inserted them, clearance looked good, so that's what we're running for the second ring. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and install the piston rings, all right? So first up is the oil ring. And so you're going to install the expander first. It's a little easier if you do this while your rod is in a vise, but this is fine. right, as you can see, this fits in there fairly loose, all right, but it'll compress. All right, now the actual oil ring itself. All right, so that's in. Next thing we're going to do is install the total seal gapless second ring, all right, and that's installed with the flanged end down, all right, so there's an indentation here, and that's facing down. It also has a dot on the top of the ring, so the dot is facing up, flanged end down. So Total Seal says you go ahead and install the machined ring first. All right, so the machined ring is the bigger one, the thicker one. All right, now, so as you can see, the gap is here on the machined ring, so you want to install the rail 180 degrees out from that gap, all right? And the rail goes on the bottom of the machined ring. All right, and that's in place. And then the top ring, all right? So the top ring, these don't have any dots on them, but there's a part number on top, all right? And the bevel on the top ring faces up, all right? So if you have a bevel on your second ring, if you've got a regular second ring, not a gapless second ring, the bevel faces down. But here, bevel faces up. All right, now let's talk about the orientation of the piston rings, okay? So, this is the piston for the number 2 cylinder, all right? And there's an arrow pointing towards the cam side, so the cam side arrow is pointing in this direction, all right? And then this is the front of the engine. If this is the front of the engine, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it. So if that is the front of the engine, you want your top ring 90 degrees to the right, all right? The gap is what I'm talking about. The gap on the top ring is 90 degrees to the right, and the gap on the second ring, all right, even though it's a gapless second ring, you still got a gap there. The gap on the second ring is opposite that, so that's 90 degrees to the left, and then your oil ring gap is going to be the same as the top ring, and the oil ring gap is also going to be 90 degrees to the right relative to the front of the engine. Okay, so again, front of the engine this way, 90 degrees to the right is the top ring gap, 90 degrees to the right is the oil ring gap, and 90 degrees to the left is the second ring gap. All right, now let's go ahead and install the rod bearings. They go ahead and pop in. The rod bearings are the same top and bottom, okay? Now once you've got your piston ready to install, next thing I do is I make sure that the crankshaft is in the right position, all right? You want it all the way, you want the rod journal all the way at the bottom of the stroke and centered, all right? Centered below that particular bore. And then I'm going to wipe down the bore, all right, with an oily rag. Get any bit of last minute debris out of there and make sure it's lubricated for the piston. And then the piston goes in a container of oil as well, just to be sure everything's nice and lubricated. All right, then I'm going to take I've already got assembly lube on the rod journal on the crank, but I also like to put some on the rod bearing as well. All right, now I'm just going to insert like so. All right, I've got an adjustable ring compressor here, and I'm doing last minute checks on my rings, and it looks like some have rotated a little bit. All right, so that's going to be, yeah, the top ring actually rotated a little bit on me. Make sure that's lined back up. Make sure the second ring is lined up, and it is. All right, go ahead and slowly ease that in. And I'm going to tap this in slowly. If it gets hung up, don't force it, all right? And as I'm tapping it in, I'm going to make sure the rod bolt is not hitting the crank. All right, there we go. That went in nice and easy. And then you should probably be able to push it on by now. Just push it down until that seats on the crankshaft. Rotate. Make sure the stamps on your caps line up, all right? And one last minute check to make sure you've got this larger radius on your cap. So one side has a small radius and one side has a large radius. The side with the large radius is going to ride right next to the crankshaft, like so, all right? Large radius next to the crank. All right, now you're going to torque these down in 2 steps. The first step is 38 foot-pounds. All right, 38, 38, and then the 51 foot-pounds. All right, that's it. Then what I like to do is I make sure the engine is still turning over nicely, all right? So after each rod and piston get installed, I go ahead and just turn it over and make sure everything is turning nicely, nothing's getting hung up. I don't hear any funny noises. I don't see any funny scrapes in the cylinders. Now we're going to measure to see how far our pistons are above the deck, all right? So on this engine, the pistons are typically above the deck, but there's a spec, all right? 31 thousandths is the max. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get it to top dead center. Okay, so what I've done is I've got, this is the number 2 piston, it's at top dead center, and I've got the dial indicator on the block surface on the deck, and it's zeroed, all right? And then we're going to go ahead and move it onto the piston, and then we get right at 31 thousandths, which is the factory max, all right? So the piston is 31 thousandths above the deck, which means we're going to be a little tight on piston to valve clearance because we're running an aftermarket camshaft with more lift and duration. So I'm going to go ahead and run a thicker head gasket as a result. I don't want to have any problems with piston to valve clearance. All right, now it's time to install the camshaft. Put some assembly lube on the cam bearing right here. So first thing you want to do is you want to line up the divot here. So that's the timing mark. It's a divot in the crank gear that's shaped like a 0. Also going to put some assembly lube on the cam lobes. Okay, as you can see, this is lined up perfectly, all right? So that dot is lined up with that dot. So cam gear lined up with the crank gear. But the problem is with this camshaft, all right, from R&D IDI, all right, it's supposed to be one tooth retarded. So the camshaft needs to be one tooth clockwise from the crankshaft, all right? So now, as you can see, we're one tooth clockwise of the timing mark on the crankshaft. The cam bolt gets torqued to 20 foot-pounds. All right, now it's time to install the two bolts that hold the cam retainer plate in place. These are 5/16 coarse thread, grade 8. There's no spec form in the manual, so you just go with the generic spec, and that's 18 foot-pounds. Okay, 18 there. And 18 there. All right, camshaft is in. Okay, now the oil pump. This is pretty simple, so you want to make sure that the teeth are all intact and not damaged. And then you want to inspect the pickup tube to make sure there are no holes in it. Pay particular attention to this area right here, all right, where the bracket has been brazed on. This looks good. There is a gasket here between the pickup tube and the body of the oil pump, and I didn't touch that. There is no gasket between the pump and the block, all right? So this guy just drops down, and there's no particular orientation either for the gear. All right, you've got three 5/16 coarse thread bolts that hold the pump to the block. Okay, these are 5/16 bolts. They do not have a torque spec in the manual, so I'm just going to go with generic torque spec for a 5/16 bolt, grade 8 coarse thread, and that is, depending on which site you're looking at, that's somewhere around 18 foot-pounds. All right, there we go. That's 18 there. 18. 18. All right. One more shot. Boom. Boom. And boom. Okay, that's all torqued up. Okay, time to install the lifters. They've been cleaned and inspected. Everything's in good shape. Okay, these are commonly called dog bones, but I suppose that's not the official term, but they are, maybe it's lifter retainer. There's an upside down and a right side up, all right? The protrusion, as you see right there, that faces upwards. All right, next up is the lifter retainer plate. That just goes in one way. and there are 3 bolts. Those are 5/16, all right? So we're going to torque those to right around 18 foot-pounds. There's no torque spec in the manual, so we're going with a generic grade 8 for a 5/16 bolt. And just to make sure everything's still moving fine, let's go ahead and rotate the engine. Yep, everything's still moving fine, folks. All right, now we're working on the front cover. I've already cleaned it up and removed the seal, all right? So this is the front seal that fits in right here. We're gonna go ahead and press it in now. The TM says you should use Permatex Aviation Forma Gasket Sealant Liquid. This is number 80019, also known as Permatex number 3. All right, I'm going to coat the inside diameter with that. You could put this on kind of thick, folks. You're just going to clean it up after the job is done. All right. All right. That's done. All right, now the seal goes in from the front, all right, and it goes in with the lip facing in that orientation, if you can see that, all right. So this is the tool that's made for the job, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and put the seal on here, and that's designed to get the seal in at the correct depth, all right. I'll post the number of the seal, the number of the kit here, right here. All right, so now that is on the tool, and then I'm just going to go ahead and position it like so. Put it on the arbor press. Put something on top to press with, and get down here to make sure it's going in straight. Started off a little cockeyed, so I'm going to press here some. There it goes. All right, now it's going in straight. I'm going to have to support that with something so it'll go in all the way. All right, so I've got a pickle jar cap, and I'm just going to use it to tap it in just a little bit more. All right, this is supposed to be sitting 10 thousandths above the below the lip, so that's good there, good there, good, good. Okay, good to go. Okay, so I've got RTV here on the block. I've got the gasket on the back of the front cover. It's time to install that. If you'll see right here, I have also marked the point on the timing gear. That is the Y as in Yankee mark, all right? That is opposite of the divot down here, which lines up with the crank. I mark that because this needs to line up with the injection pump gear, okay? And it's not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to see that very easily once you get the front cover on. So front cover goes on easily. It's just going to slide on. There's some dowels down here on the bottom that it's going to rest on. All right, and then you just got to install the bolts. Okay, so what I've done here is I got the front plate installed. It's been sitting for an hour to let the gasket material set up, all right? And now I'm going to go ahead and torque down the bolts. I installed some extra bolts here, like where it would be holding the water pump on, so I could get a good seal between the front cover and the block, all right? And I'll install the water pump at a later date. So what I'm going to do now, these are 5/16 bolts, and so those are torqued to 18 foot-pounds. So let's go ahead and get those torqued down. All right, all done. I'll come back later and remove those extra bolts. All right, time for the rear seal. Same deal here. Aviation Permatex number 3. And you can see the orientation of the lip. We're also going to press this one in from the front. And I'm just going to use a piece of wood here. There it goes. Okay, and there's no special measurement here. This one doesn't have to be 10,000ths below. The one I removed out of here appeared to be original, and it was just slightly proud of the lip here. So that's where I'm going to leave this one. So that's in. I'm just going to clean up the Permatex and call that good. All right, this is going to be tricky. I've got to get the rear cover on while the engine is on a stand, and it's just going to take some finagling. It's on. I did a few practice fits, and maybe that's why it didn't fight me that much. So it is in there. All right, everything is at least finger tight. So I'm going to set a timer for an hour and then come back in an hour and torque them down. Okay, so now it's time to put the oil pan on. The pan rail right here is clean. I cleaned it with acetone. Also on the front cover and the rear cover, everything has been clean. It's oil free. Your RTV will not stick to oil, all right? And speaking of RTV, we're just using good old Ultra Black, all right? And I'm gonna put it on fairly generously. And folks, you can overdo it with the RTV. The problem is that when you overdo it, you end up getting RTV that comes off inside the engine, all right? So it'll push inside here and there'll be a big strip hanging down. And next thing you know, it's fallen off and it's clogged up your oil pump. So that's not good. Okay, obviously the oil pump has been cleaned. You can see that's been painted, and the rail on the inside of that is nice and clean as well. All right, now what I'm doing is I'm just going finger tight, plus just a little bit more, all right? Not torquing them down yet. So I get them finger tight, and then I hit them with the ratchet until I feel them just starting to tighten up, all right? Okay, the RTV has cured for an hour, so now it's time to go ahead and torque it to spec. Spec for these is 14 foot-pounds or 168 inch-pounds. Go ahead here. Right. All right, oil pan's on. All All right, now we've got to install the dowel pins, all right? So you need to drive this in with something soft. I just generally take a piece of wood and tap it in. All right, and as you can see, we've got 2 pins per side, all right, here and here. All right, got to install the ones on the other side, and then we'll go ahead and install the head studs. Okay, folks, that is it for this episode. But before I sign off, I have 3 requests for you. Request number 1, if you're not a subscriber, click on the subscribe button. Somewhere down there, all right, on your screen is a button that says subscribe. So click on it, please, all right? Number 2, check out the other videos on this engine build, all right? So what we did in this episode was we did an assembly. But before we got to that point, there was a lot of other things that needed to happen, all right? So we inspected some cylinder heads, we magnafluxed them, we checked out the valve guides. What else did we do? We magnafluxed the engine block, we polished the crankshaft right here in the garage, and several other things, all right? So that's episodes 14 through episode 20 of Project Brutus, so check those out. The 3rd request for you, check back for more content, all right? I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. The engine is done at this point. It is sitting in the truck, all right? I haven't started it yet, but it is all assembled. So I've got some more content that I just have to edit and post. So check back for some other videos, and there's gonna be 1, maybe 2 more on the engine assembly of the 7.3 IDI turbo for old Project Brutus. All right, thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the Bulletproof Garage.